Welcome into the Tottenham Depot. I am your host, Andrew. This is episode 183. You can follow us at Tottenham Depot. We've got Scott alongside. He is at Scott G. Bird. We're going to talk some transfer rumors and news and notes as we have entered June and the transfer window is right around the corner. Scott, what's going on, my friend?
Getting ready for my favorite time of the year. Good old transfer season. Speculation and all kinds of wild claims and lots of people just screaming at each other on Twitter. Yeah, it should be good.
Yeah, no one else really wanted to pod today except for you. You were like, "Yeah, man, let's do this." So it's definitely your favorite time of the year. We've got a few things to on tap, some rumors to dive into. Before that, did you get a chance to check out the Champions League final yesterday? Madrid once again, the champions of Europe. Did you catch any of that?
I did. Yeah, I watched the match. I was a Nicholas Fulkrug goal away from winning $500. So that was a bummer that his goal was offside. But yeah, other than that, it was a great game to watch. I think the assumed and deserved winner in Real Madrid, won the match, and I was happy for a guy like Jude Bellingham, who just seems to be a really, really good guy with a great background and a great support system around him. So I was all happy to see him win a Champions League title, but as a neutral, I think it would have been pretty cool to see Dortmund have one as well, right?
Yeah, definitely a lot of success between both of those clubs. I actually did hit a bet on the. I placed my bet live at halftime after Madrid were getting their butts kicked in the first half. I was like, that's not going to continue. There's no way that continues. So I bet Madrid live and at halftime when it was goalless and hit that one. I just never thought that they were losing that match, and Dortmund just couldn't capitalize on the opportunities that they had in the first half. They had so many of them. And the fact that they didn't capitalize and score at least one or two goals in that first half, I just from there I thought Madrid had it, and sure enough they did. And it feels like a broken record. Real Madrid always seems to win this competition when they have even the slightest bit of a chance to do so, and they did it once again. So congrats to them, I suppose. Spurs will be aiming for that in future years. Next year it'll be the Europa League that we take down. Following year, maybe the Champions League will be in our offing. I think today is actually isn't today the 5-year anniversary of Spurs in the Champions League? I'm pretty sure it was June 2nd as we record this.
Sounds right. Yeah, I mean we're
Yeah,
we're really close to that day for sure. God, 5 years doesn't seem like it's been that long.
5 years since Musa Sissoko's shoulder inside of his shoulder cost us a chance at a Champions League trophy against Liverpool. So not
Or
the
was
way
it
I
Harry
really,
Kane?
not the way I really intended to kick off the pod, but that's how we're doing it. I mentioned lots of kind of just news and notes from the week. This is not going to be a very long pod. It's just you and I kind of kicking it here on a Sunday and chatting. But let's start with the Timo Werner news. Timo Werner is going to stay at Spurs next season. This is something we've talked about for months. And Spurs had the option to buy him permanently and instead have kind of kicked the can down the road. They are once again going to have Timo Werner on a 1-year loan deal going into next season from RB Leipzig. And they've kind of pushed the potential permanent move back another summer. That permanent move, the terms, it sounds like are still going to stay the same, about 15, 16 million pounds if they want to keep him beyond next year. But this, I feel like, is almost the best of both worlds. I put out a poll I believe on our Twitter account or X account, if you will. And it was pretty overwhelmingly in favor of this move. I'm going to pull up the results here of that poll as I kind of let you tell me your thoughts on this. What's your thoughts on Timo coming in for just another 1-year loan deal as opposed to the permanent move that was so rumored?
Yeah, I mean I think first of all, because it's a loan and not the rumored permanent deal, we have more money to spend elsewhere, right? And his wages go into it. That is a cost, but we need to invest in many places. And the fact that it was a loan deal, I think, just makes it much, much more favorable than it even was, which I was in favor of bringing him in permanently either way. But, and I do hear people talk about kicking the can down the road and all of that, but who cares? I think right now we want to finally win something, right? And having a squad full of depth, regardless of how it happens and what the future looks like, is really important right now. So I'm glad we brought him in. I mean, 13 appearances last year, 2 goals, 3 assists, serviceable for somebody off the bench, right? Which is what we're going to expect of him. And he also, at one point, had a great expected assist statistic, right? And it's really his finishing that gets people wound up, and that's fine, right? Guys need to be able to finish. I'm not gonna pretend that it's perfectly fine to not be able to finish, but he'll put his teammates in good positions, and again, he's gonna be important depth as we compete on four fronts next year.
I think that's the key too. It's important depth. For me, this was never going to be the be all end all move, but as you're talking about not only the rigors of a 38 game Premier League season, cup competitions that you hope to be in longer than Spurs were this past season, and of course Europa League, which is there's going to be more games in Europa League. We've talked about that ad nauseum as well. I think the depth is a nice piece, and if you can do it on a loan deal, sure, I'm fine with that. The poll I put out, I gave people 3 different options. Whether the question was, are you in favor of Spurs' decision to bring Timo Werner back on a loan deal? There was a yes, there was a no, and there was a depends on other moves. And I think that's where I land is depending on other moves. This is the right move because they still need to do more in that realm of dribbly winger, attacking winger types of players. And we're gonna talk about some of those options a little bit later on in the pod, but 73% of people just selected the yes option, that they were approving of this move, and another 19% said depending on other moves. So it's only 8% that are against this move. I think this is, the faction of fans who just think that Timo Werner is, used goods and can't finish, which, as you mentioned, to some extent, the finishing was and probably still will be a problem. But if you can get yourself into positions in this system, you can create. And you mentioned expected assists. I mean, he was getting to the byline and cutting back plenty this season before his injury ended the year prematurely. So I'm fine with this move. I think it's one of those very Tottenham like moves. It's like it's efficient, it's cost effective, and sure there are wages to talk about, but if you're only paying those wages for one season, there's an old saying really it's in baseball that there's no such thing as a bad 1 year contract, and like that's essentially what this is. Like it's a 1 year deal, and if it works out that he has a great season, maybe you do think about a permanent move after that. But if he doesn't, you can just cut ties, and it's not the end of the world either way. So I'm totally fine with this type of move going forward.
Yeah, and I believe it's 8.1 million to make it permanent at the end of this season, as opposed to the I think 13-ish million that it would have cost us this summer to buy him. So that's a huge positive and a very Daniel Levy thing to do. I also think it's worth mentioning when it comes to his wages and all of that, like it's not my money. I don't care how it's spent. I just don't. If the club thinks that it was the right decision, then sure, spend your own money. I don't care, right? But I just always think and I'm not saying people are silly, but I just think it's a little bit silly as fans to like start trying to balance the books from Twitter, right? For Tottenham. I don't care. Spend your money if you want, but like if we don't bring in anyone as far as a winger goes, and it's just Timo Werner, then we've got massive problems. And I'm not saying that as a threat to the club. I'm just saying as a club, we've got big problems for our aspirations if that's all we do.
I totally agree with you on the it's not my money part of things. I do get how folks believe that if they're spending money in certain areas, they won't spend it in other areas. But I don't. I'm almost of the mindset of you've got to prove to me that you're not going to do the right, and like the window hasn't even technically opened yet. So it's like I'm not going to freak out about any of these things. There was a lot of what's the best way to put this, hubbub, I suppose, about what this would mean for some Tottenham youth players such as Mikey Moore. And look, I know you put out a little bit of a Twitter thread about, youth players, and we've talked a little bit about this over the last few weeks. And I think there's an understanding that players like Mikey Moore are still teenagers. They're still, for lack of a better term, children. They don't have the senior minutes under their belt to just come in and be a true option in this team. Maybe if Spurs didn't have aspirations to be, winning Europa Leagues and winning anything and being a top 4 club next year, maybe if the expectations were that Spurs were going to be a mid-table side, like, I would lean a little bit more toward the youth. But the fact that this is a club that has bigger aspirations, I just don't see them going and playing Mikey Moore on a regular basis. And I'm excited about Mikey Moore. There was a really nice piece by the new Tottenham beat writer, Jay Harris, in The Athletic this week on Mikey Moore and kind of eyes to the future. But Mikey Moore's 16 years old. Like, I think we forget that. I mean, he's really, really young and has a lot of growth to do. And it would be great if a 16-year-old could step into a Premier League side and make an impact. But I think you had the line a few weeks ago, Wayne Rooney's don't come around very often. It just does not happen very often. So I don't know. I don't know if you have anything else to say about that. I feel like we're very much on the same page. There's not going to be a lot of disagreement with us, but where are you with that?
Yeah, I mean, for those who haven't seen my tweet, first of all, you should be scouring my Twitter at all times. That you should be sitting waiting for me to tweet at all times, obviously. But all jokes aside, if you haven't seen it, I did put out a thread that talked about this, as you said. And my main point behind all of it was that in order to implement youth into the squad, you have to have a very stable environment with a recipe that has been established at the very top and then has worked its way down through the ranks. And Emma Hayes even talked about this yesterday, that you come in and, obviously she's speaking about her new opportunity as a women's national team manager, and you come in and you get it figured out at the very top, and it takes some time. And then the U23s and the U18s and the U14s and everybody starts to play the same system. So that's the goal. Spurs are not there yet. Our first team is not an expert in the system. Our youth teams are not experts in the system. And so if you ask, say, Mikey Moore to come into a Premier League match and it's moving at a pace that he's never even remotely sniffed, right? We're talking, if we're talking Premier League 2 to the Premier League, it's probably jumping like 40 leagues in Europe, right? It's a massive, massive jump for these guys. And when you're in that situation and you start spinning and you're lost and you just feel completely overwhelmed by the game that you're a part of, you need to check back to something, right? You need to have that lighthouse, as I called it on my tweet, when you're lost in the storm. And that lighthouse has to be a system that's ingrained in the DNA of the club and that everybody has been learning and digesting for years. We are so far away from that. So to ask Mikey Moore to step up and compete for major minutes is really asking him to become overwhelmed quickly and maybe impact the mental side of his development severely, honestly, if we really want to talk about it. There's reasons why City and Liverpool are the two clubs that implement guys who no one's ever heard of that are 17, 18 years old, and they come in and they do well. It's because they really just have to step into this well-oiled cog, this well-oiled machine. They're tasked with doing one thing in that system. They're able to do it because everybody knows what's asked of them and they do it perfectly, right? So we'll get there eventually. And honestly, by the time we're there, Mikey Moore is going to be like 18, and probably if I'm a betting person, by the time he's 19, he starts for Spurs. But that's 3 years from now. So let's give him time.
And by the way, we'll have to see what the likes of Liverpool are able to do with their youth team and bringing players in with Klopp leaving.
Yeah,
like, it's going to be a different system, a different manager. We'll see after, if it's the case that after next season, Pep Guardiola does leave Manchester City, we'll see how that system changes and how many youth players they're really bringing through and playing at an early age. So it's all relative. And I think your point is a good one, that this is year one of this program and this system. And, obviously Mikey Moore is one to look at and one to pay a lot of attention to, but But Timo Werner is going to be here next season, and I don't think he's stealing minutes from Mikey Moore in any respect.
No,
So we'll
he's
see.
not.
Let's move on to our next topic, which is Richarlison. Richarlison got on the socials last week and pretty much put an end to rumors that he was leaving England, which was interesting wording. He called any reports that he was going to be departing fake news, which I thought was a really nice touch from Richarlison. Little cheeky, especially in the wake of everything that happened last week in the world.
What happened
Um,
last week? Uh,
nothing
we're not going to
nothing
get.
nothing that we need to discuss, but Richarlison saying that he's not leaving, and again I emphasize that he said not leaving England, not leaving Spurs, which I think had a lot of people kind of furrowing their eyebrows, including myself a little bit. I was like, wait, you're not leaving England? That was followed by a report from Dan Kilpatrick of the Evening Standard saying Spurs are actually going to listen to offers on Richarlison. They're not going to actively shop him, but they will listen, even if that includes perhaps a Saudi team coming in. And I'm just, I'm of the mindset that I don't think Richarlison is going anywhere, but I'm also, if Spurs can get their money back or close to it for what they paid for Richarlison, I'm also not entirely opposed because I feel like that money would be flipped into a striker that it's more suitable for the system. Not to say that Richarlison is a bad option, but I think there could be a better option. Where are you with Richarlison going into next year? Obviously, I feel like injuries played a massive part of his season. But I don't know. Richarlison, I like Richarlison. I don't love Richarlison. I think that's kind of where I sit. Where are you?
Yeah, I think if he's the number two competing for minutes with someone we bring in who can serve as the number one striker, then I think that's great. I think he'll be a wonderful piece of depth. I think he showed us nine goals in 9 games this year while Sonny was out, right? So he can put the ball in the back of the net, but I don't think he thrives in situations where he's not the focal point of the attack, right? Um, and so again, I think if he's a backup and competing for minutes, then that's wonderful. And if we can get an offer that allows us to bring, say, Solanke and Tony in and have two Premier League strikers competing for minutes, right? Then guys who have proven statistically to be Premier League quality strikers, true number nines, then yeah, I think you listen to offers for Richarlison, and I talked about it on the last show. I hate to see him go, but we're also a club who, in my opinion, gets way too attached to our players, and we should be attached to the club. And if moving on Richarlison puts us in a better position to win, then thanks for this. Thanks for the service, and I wish him all the best. I don't think he'll go to Saudi though, because I think he has a good conscience, and I think he's a good dude. And I could be wrong. He could prove me quite wrong, and not that I would necessarily think less of him if he did, but I just doesn't feel like a move he'd be interested in. And it's nice to see him come out and say, "I'm not leaving England." Right now, if it's Everton, be super happy for him, right? But we'll see.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I actually don't think he's leaving Spurs. I know he worded, his social media posts about he's not leaving England, but I think he's going to be around next year, and I do think he'll be a piece of this, and I think he'll probably be the main striker piece. I know he's working to getting back to full strength. He's kind of foregone some of his his time away, his time on vacation to get himself back that way. And I think he's really got an eye and a focus to next season. I'll be interested to see what the pieces are that are brought in around him. I brought up in our group chat just earlier Troy Parrott, the fact that he's had such a great season on loan in the Netherlands. I definitely think not only is he an option to come in behind Richarlison, and look, if that's all that Spurs did this summer was just bring Troy Parrott back, I think there'd be a little bit left to be desired there. I think they need certainly more in the attacking realm. But Troy Parrott is homegrown, and there's a lot to like there, and a lot that he's turned around. Um, since over the last few years, since going on loan a couple times. But I'm just interested, and I think Richarlison will be around. I'm just interested to see what the pieces are that they put around these other attacking players. I know there's been links to Eze and a number of other like winger options, but as a true central attacker and a true striker, a central forward, I do think Richarlison will be in the mix. So we'll just have to kind of see how it plays out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think Troy Parrott comes back, and my opinion is that we need a striker. Um, I think again, there's two names in Tony and Solanke who are viable options, and I think Solanke is a really interesting one because he'll cost less than Tony, and he didn't just miss, X amount of months, which impacts a player for sure. So Solanke, I would love to bring him in, and then I think Parrott comes back, and Parrott and Belize are competing for that third striker spot, right behind Richarlison and whoever we bring in. And I think whoever doesn't stand out in that competition probably is loaned out, or in Troy Parrott's case, maybe moved on. I don't think you can move on Belize yet, but ultimately that leads me to saying, unfortunately, it's probably time for Dane Scarlett to go play football somewhere else, right? And I love Dane Scarlett, and he's young, but I just don't think he's going to have quite what we need. I think there have been opportunities to maybe show that, and I could be way off on this, but I think if it comes down to Valise, Parrott, and Scarlett, and only two of those three can be part of the setup, then I think it's only Dane Scarlett who could be, the candidate to move on, unfortunately. But we'll see.
I could easily see Scarlett going out on loan. I don't think Spurs would move on from him entirely next season. That would be surprising to me. I think he's definitely still one to hold on to for the future. But yeah, there's a lot of options and a lot of young options behind the likes of Richarlison. So we'll see how that goes. But kind of leading on to the Dan Kilpatrick reporting, there is a report that Spurs are like not only set to clear bodies out, but a lot of them. Spurs reportedly ready to move on this summer from Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, Giovanni Lo Celso, Brian Hill, Emerson Royale, Manor Solomon, Ryan Sessegnon, as well as returning loanees like Joe Rodon, Jed Spence, Sergio Reguilon, Tanguy Ndombele, and Jaffa Tanganga. That's a lot of names to move on from. And as I read them off, I sit there and say, I wouldn't really be heartbroken about any of them. Where are you? Do any of those names stand out as names that you would be really, really broken up about losing, or are you fully just ready to move on from all of them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I put the list together of 15 people who I think could be viable candidates for being moved on, right? And everyone you said has been on my list. Lo Celso's on my list. Another interesting one is Skip. I don't think we're looking to move Skip on, but we did see a report come out that he's interested in finding an opportunity to play more football. And he's a really good center mid. I don't think he's what we need any longer, but I think he could easily start for any team finishing somewhere between fifth and eighth place in the Premier League, right? I think he's a very good center mid. And so I think if we can get our homegrown stuff worked out with the incomings, I wouldn't be shocked if Skip moves on. Now, at the same time, he showed a capability of playing fullback, and those guys who can flip flop between fullback and center mid are really nice to have around. They're awesome depth guys. They allow you to do more with your bench from a flexibility standpoint and add more attackers, right? So it's interesting, but when you go back to the fact that it was released in the press that Skip was looking for an opportunity to play more, I think as a club, if we can find a way to get the homegrown stuff worked out, we owe it to Oliver Skip to let him listen to other opportunities to play football.
So the Skip thing is interesting. It was reported originally by Alistair Gold of Football.London, and he also reported the story that we're going to talk about next. Well, and let's just get into it. He reported about Marcus Edwards. And
Mhm.
the Oliver Skip thing is interesting because he's obviously a homegrown player, but so is Marcus Edwards. So
Yeah.
it is like when you start to look, we all know how much I love the transfer season, but when you start to read these reports and these pieces from different people, you kind of start to put some puzzle pieces together. And the fact that the same journalist and a really well-respected one in Alistair Gold is reporting these two things on the same day, or, within the same few days, a report that Oliver Skip may want to move on to find more playing time, and that Marcus Edwards is open to an England return and would not be opposed to it being a return to Spurs, even though it didn't really end that well for him previously at Spurs. It was a little bit of a messy breakup there. Let me start on Skip. On Skip, look, you brought up the fullback thing. I thought he played okay in a pinch at fullback. I don't think he's a fullback going forward. I think he's a
No, I agree.
midfielder, and a not very progressive one, but also not very defensive one. He's very much a midfielder, if you will, for me
Dude, he's a mini
personally.
PEH. He's literally just a mini Pierre-Emile Højbjerg.
I think that's right. And I think that he can do a job for a mid to lower table Premier League team. I think he can be a guy that sticks. We saw the job he did at Norwich a few years ago. I thought he's above that level, but I don't think he's quite to the Spurs level.
Dude, he's like Fulham Crystal Palace for me. Is right
He's
about right with him.
extremely, I think that's extremely, he's extremely Crystal Palace. He's extremely Everton. He's
Yeah.
extremely, maybe Brighton in his best moments. He's,
Good job.
but also he's Sheffield United in his worst moments. So
Mm-hmm.
like he's that kind of player. He can flash, but he's not going to be the consistent midfield presence you want for a Premier League side for me. And again, this is all just my opinion. I think Skippy's great. I think he's been a great ambassador for the club. He's obviously come through the ranks. The Marcus Edwards thing, I do think perhaps ties into this. And it's interesting because Spurs still have a sell-on clause for Marcus Edwards of 35%, meaning, and the report states, Sporting would likely ask for about 15 million for him, which would cut the cost to around just under 10 million if it were to be for Spurs because of the sell-on clause. I think that's a really proper price for a player like Marcus Edwards. And if you are moving on from Skip and you're worried about homegrown numbers, this is a swap. So it doesn't seem that illogical for these reports, especially when you're talking about this, like I said, the same reporter, and I'm pretty sure they also share the same agent, Edwards and Skip do. So it's all
Yeah.
very, like the sourcing on this is pretty, and it's early days. The window hasn't even opened. The window doesn't even open for another few weeks, but it is something to kind of just keep an eye on and take note of. And when we're talking about clear outs, that original list I gave you, the Højbjerg, Lo Celso, all those names, Skip wasn't even on that list originally, but he's another one to think about in terms of could this be it? And look, I mentioned this a few weeks ago. We still don't really fully know who is long for this system under Ange Postecoglou. He's had two windows. He's had one season. I think this summer we're going to learn a lot more about who are his guys that he wants to keep going forward. Of the names that I mentioned before, I am a little bit surprised. I'm not surprised based on the playing time he received, but I'm surprised based on the type of player he is that Lo Celso would be just chucked to the side, because I do think Lo Celso can do a job. I thought in the moments that he got, which were few and far between, we did see him play fairly well. There were just injury issues and just issues staying healthy and staying on the pitch and being a regular part of training throughout the year for Lo Celso. He is probably going to move on, and I think it's going to be one of those what could have beens with him. He's the only
Yeah.
name that I would kind of squint a little bit and say I could see him sticking around. But of the other names that are involved in this discussion, I'm not really that surprised by any of them. I just think it's really hard to move on. You said 15, whether it's 10 to 15 names, that's normally hard to do. So we'll have to see kind of what comes of it. But I also think that it's going to be interesting to see how this market evolves now that we're a few years removed from a COVID pandemic and teams are starting to get their footing back financially. For Spurs, moving players on has been a problem over the last few years, and I think a big part of that has been simply the market. There hasn't been a lot of offers
Yeah.
out for these players
Yep.
because teams don't have money. So now that we're a few years removed from, the financial woes of the pandemic, hopefully some of the faucet can be turned on to move some players on, hopefully.
Yeah, we need to, because in my opinion, we need at least 6 first team players, guys who can come in and play significant minutes, if not a seventh and an eighth. I think we need a striker, a wide forward. I think we need a six. I think we need a center back. And I think we're going to need to figure out who's going to back up Grady Rapora. And there could be a wild card too, like a Connor Gallagher. So if we're talking anywhere from 6 to 8 signings, you got to get these guys out first, and it has to be done very shrewdly. I think homegrown again is going to play a factor. I think Marcus Edwards, my gut says he's coming to Spurs. Not only because of these 2 reports that you talked about that are very, very reliable when it comes to the source, but he's a dribbling winger who's very technical in the box. If you look at the fact that all comps, we were awarded 5 penalties last year, and we've talked about on this show a lot about penalties and refereeing and all of that, right? But the fact that we only won 5 penalties tells me we need more technical players who are willing to get into the right spaces in the box, right? There's no way around it. We've got to have guys who are more shifty in the box. Marcus Edwards is one of them. I mean, he just won Liga NOS down in Portugal with Sporting. He's got the taste of what it takes to win your domestic league. Not that he's the exact game changer that comes in and wins you the Premier League, but he ticks a lot of boxes. And as you said, he's not only homegrown, but he's club trained, which is a big thing for Europa League too, right? So I think he's a bang on signing. But when you look at homegrown beyond him, I think you got to look at somebody like Lloyd Kelly at left center back. He's homegrown in England. You got to look at a guy like Eze, not only because of the homegrown piece, but because I think he comes in and starts and elevates the first 11 right away, right? I think it's striker. There's guys like Solanke and Tony, as we've already talked about, that are homegrown. And then another interesting name is Gray from, I believe, is it Everton? Oh, shoot. Now I'm going to have to fact check myself on this.
Yeah, I think you have that right. Damari Gray.
No.
That's who you're talking about from Everton?
No, there's a center midfielder who just broke through the ranks. Archie Gray, thank you. From Leeds United, from the Championship. I think Archie Gray is an interesting shout because he is homegrown, but he's been very viable at center mid and at a right back this season. So as the listener can tell, not an expert on this kid. I thought he played for Everton and he plays for Leeds United, but I do think he's an interesting profile that we'll take a look at as a club. He's probably one for the future, but he's homegrown. And my point for bringing him up is we're going to have to be very creative with how we handle the homegrown quota when it comes to all these outgoings, because these guys have got to move on. We cannot continue to let the club suffer because we're keeping these homegrown pieces around for too long who don't have an impact on the first 11, right? It really, really puts the club in a tough spot. And again, for us to get all these guys out, we're going to have to look at guys who are primarily homegrown for our incomings, right? And that's where, again, a guy like Marcus Edwards seems like a really good fit. A guy like Eze seems like a really good fit. Hudson-Odoi seems like a very interesting fit for Spurs, right? And we've heard his name thrown around quite a bit, but I would not be surprised if we don't bring in a single player who's not homegrown.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is something to look at, especially, and your point about the Europa League, the club trained is also extremely important, as well as the homegrown. Speaking of homegrown, the last kind of bit of news that we got this week was that of Brandon Austin, the quote unquote third string goalkeeper, signing a new contract. And the significant part of this is it's a 5-year deal through the 2029 season. And I guess what I wanted to bring up with you about this is the fact that this is a 25-year-old who is yet to make his senior team debut, but they're giving him a 5-year contract. Does this does this put him in position to usurp Fraser Forster as the number 2 goalkeeper at any point, even as early as next season? Or is this just this feels like another almost kicking the can down the road and keeping a homegrown name on the list? I don't know what to make of Brandon Austin's career. It's not that 25 is old for a goalkeeper, but he really hasn't had senior minutes since he went on loan to Orlando a few years ago and played in MLS. Like, he has not had minutes. He obviously is, according to the club, worthy enough to keep him around for the next 5 years. But I'm a little bit puzzled as to what Spurs' plans are behind Vicario in the goalkeeper position. Where are you at with this?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought with Austin is you already said the word, and I was going to say there's a song that I love by the Jimmy Weeks Project called "Homegrown," and I think that is the biggest word to throw around with a Brandon Austin. How many more times can we say "homegrown" in one single podcast? But I also think that there could be a little something to the idea that he's impressed Ange Postecoglou as somebody who could be there if God forbid we need someone beyond Vicario in between the sticks, right? So I think Fraser Forster is a viable shot stopper, and I think it doesn't really go any further than that. I'm not sure he's great with the ball. Never want to see him in a penalty shootout again. It just reminds me of the gif of the robot falling over in a penalty shootout that I think Fox Sports has put out in all of their infinite wisdom. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, again, if there's a slight something to the idea that he could potentially be the number 2. And I think for that to have happened, of course, he has to impress Ange Postecoglou, but maybe he's shown that he's viable as that third center back when we have our high cell line, and he's shown strong quality on the ball and some pace and some power, and Ange likes that. So who knows?
Yeah, it's certainly, like, as you mentioned, Fraser Forster is not an Ange Postecoglou goalkeeper. Like, that's not a fit whatsoever. And I think he only made the one appearance in the League Cup match last season. The rest of the
Yeah,
time,
that's it.
Vicario was playing, and I would expect Vicario to play much, if not all, of the matches next season as well.
Yeah,
Brandon Austin, I just double checked. In 2019, went on loan to Denmark and made 14 appearances and had one clean sheet in those 14 appearances. And then in 2021 was on loan to Orlando City in MLS and made 5 appearances. So not a lot of football for this guy over the last half decade, really, when you look at it.
yeah.
Uh, but
Well,
I'm just curious to know if he's, like, giving him a 5-year contract. And look, guys, it's June 2nd. We're debating backup goalkeeper. Not even really debating, but discussing it. And that's where we are in the calendar, like, when we look at this. But it is interesting to me, like, for years, Spurs didn't have to worry about goalkeeper, and it appears they still don't really with Vicario. But if something happens to Vicario, knock on wood, I'd be curious to know what's going to happen after that. I don't think Fraser Forster is really the best option to play this system. So is it Brandon Austin, I guess, is my question. And the fact that the club has given him a 5-year contract tells me not only is his birth certificate proper, but because of the homegrown factor, but maybe there is something to, okay, this guy could do a job in a pinch, hopefully.
yeah, I think if I had to answer, is he the number 2 or the number 3? Confidently, I'd say the number 3. I think he was signed on a long-term deal to make sure we had a viable third goalkeeper. He might be a guy that's great to have around the team. He actually does seem pretty active, in the socials of the first team. And I don't mean social media, but just the social interaction of the first team, right? I think he's a guy that everybody seems to like. And there's nothing wrong with being a backup quarterback, baby. We talk about it all the time, right? He's earning a decent living. He's just hanging out with the boys every day, going to play a little footy. And all jokes aside, like, some people maybe don't want to leave their home. Maybe
Sure.
maybe 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 you don't love your career that much to where you'll uproot your life and everything you've ever known, and and maybe that's something with Brandon Austin, but ultimately he's got to be the third string keeper. Why that is between him and himself. But I'm happy that we have a long term viable third keeper, right?
I don't begrudge him any of that. It's also, we haven't brought up the name Alfie Whiteman. It very well could mean the end of the road for him. They're
Oh,
the
he's
same
got to be
age.
moving on. He's on my
Yeah, you would
list.
think they're both 25, both Academy keeper products. You got to think a 5-year deal for Brandon Austin probably doesn't mean a 5-year deal for Alfie Whiteman as well. Like, I would imagine this probably means the end of the road for him, but crazier things have happened. So we will kind of let it play out. That's pretty much all we've got this week for you here on the Depot. A few things to just note. Spurs did announce yet another preseason friendly that brings the total, I believe, to 5 now, and with a possible 6th being added. Spurs will play Hearts on July 17th in Edinburgh. They will then play QPR at Loftus Road 3 days later. Then there's a trip out to Japan to play Vissel Kobe. That is July 27th. A all-star match against the K-League is supposed to be thrown in there, which they did, I think, a year or two ago when they traveled to Asia. And then those 2 matches against Bayern Munich, one of them in Seoul and one of them at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in August. So the preseason schedule is coming together quite filling up, frankly, surrounding obviously Euros, Copa America, all those things going to be happening here in the next few weeks as well as the transfer window, of course, opening up on Friday, June 14th. And then this coming week, I believe we'll get Premier League fixtures announced this week. I think that happens either Monday or Tuesday of this week. And then Tuesday, we are also set to get an announcement of Spurs home kit for the season, which is gonna happen. We're ready for it, and here it is. We saw images of it, but we've seen even more now. Spurs home kit. What do you think, Scott? Are you a fan? We saw like leaked images weeks ago, but now we're getting like actual pictures of a human body in the home kit. This is the kit that is set to be released for those of you watching on our YouTube page, youtube.com/Tottenham Depot. What do we think? Do we like this?
I think it's very clean. I really do. I didn't quite like the leaks, but I think it's a very nice looking kit. I wish the logo wasn't red, and I don't say that because I'm like I don't do the anti-red, never red thing, right? It's not really my jam, but I would love for that AIA to be purple. That's all I'll say. But I think it's a perfect kit. Otherwise, it's really clean.
Yeah, there's always a lot of discussion about the AIA being red. I know that, but there's just not much else you can do when the company itself is, is dictating that. But
Yeah.
there it is again. There's another shot of it. I do like it. I like the shorts as well. I think the shorts are very clean. It's not. I've kind of fallen away from being a big kit guy over the last few years, but this is one I might
I might
dabble
buy that.
into. It's a
Yeah.
good home kit. It's clean. It's white. Everyone knows. I've talked about this a lot. The kit is pretty good. We'll have to talk when the away and the third kits are released. There's going to be some differing opinions, I think, on both of those, but that is a pretty decent looking kit. So we should get
Yeah.
the release of that this week as well.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is that the model, I think that was blue steel, actually, if I'm not mistaken. I really do think that he nailed the blue steel. Good looking guy for sure, that model. And he had blue steel spot on. I'm telling you, if you haven't seen it, as soon as you see it, you'll notice the blue steel for those of us who are maybe like 30 or older, right?
I have to admit to you, when I first saw those images floating around on the internet earlier today, I thought that was Dane Scarlett when I first glanced, because he does kind of look a little bit like
kind of
Dane
does look
Scarlett,
like Dane. Yeah, I'll
like
give
an
you
older
that.
version of Dane Scarlett. But
Yeah,
yeah,
Dane's brother.
it's not Dane Scarlett, but it very well could have been. So
Uh,
that is going to do it for this episode of the Tottenham Depot. Be sure to check out our episodes on the YouTube page. I mentioned it earlier. We are posting everything up on YouTube now, youtube.com/Tottenham Depot. Be sure to also leave us a rating and review on your podcast app of choice. It really does help spread the word about the show. And follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, and TikTok at Tottenham Depot, or you can reach out to us via email at tottenhamdepot@gmail.com. You can follow Scott at Scott G. Bird. You can follow me at A. Stetka. We'll be back with you next week to talk about whatever else is going on in the world of Spurs. Until then, this has been the Tottenham Depot podcast. As always, come on, you Spurs.